Zambia is experiencing the worst inflation rate, exchange rates, gross domestic product, GDP, horrible gross national product, GNP, depleted reserves, the shockingly firing of the Minister of Finance and the central bank governor, unpleasant balance of payments, financial national statements, poor terms of trade, financial statements, high and huge debt crisis, poor health facilities, huge unemployment rates. But yet, the people in authority don't want to focus on improving all these poor economic indicators. Instead, those entrusted to improve the citizens' livelihoods divert and shift focus to how privatization occurred 20 years ago. In this episode, we study the hypothesis of privatization of 20 years ago and our current economic downturn due to poor economic policy planning. At the end of today's episode, we should be able to either accept the hypothesis or nullify the hypothesis in question. In simple language, is there a relationship between the privatization of 20 years ago and today's poor economic status of the Zambian economy? In fact, when you analyze the privatization process, it brought about more good than bad for our economy, which was performing very poorly before privatization. A few examples can be in the transport sector. We suffered greatly to move around the country. I'm sure those of us who were there in the 80s can remember, since we only had a state-owned bus called the United Bus Company of Zambia, or UBZ. But after privatization, we've been enjoying Max Motorways, Euro buses, Majanul buses, Jordan Motors, and many more luxurious buses. This not only improved the efficiency and comfort, but also has created a lot of jobs in this sector. The hospitality industry, like hotels, also boomed after privatization, and Livingstone has become a city. For example, in 2019, this industry contributed 7% of GDP, which is approximately 1.7 billion United States dollars, and contributed about 7% of Zambia's total employment. That's about 500,000 jobs. Tourists brought in close to 900 million US dollars, which is about 10% of Zambia's total exports in that year. Our economy has seen a growth in our GDP since the privatization era, only until the PF came into power. The graph of GDP growth rate has been declining since 2012. Recently, an opposition leader of one of the minority opposition parties, Edith Nawakwi, has been on a serious campaign against the leader of the largest opposition political party, President Hakainde Hichilema, who is the most likely candidate to take over in the coming presidential elections next year, claiming that he did acquire enormous wealth from the privatization in the early 90s. In this study, we will not dwell on her history of losing elections for all these past elections before HH joined the political arena to rally for the presidential position. A pact between these two failed because of lack of compromise between the two leaders, despite her party being the smaller one of the two. Today's focus will not dwell on small opposition parties who have formed allies with the PF. We will analyze privatization of the early 90s and how today's policymakers are failing to control today's economy in Zambia. Today we will not waste our time to discuss Edith Nawakwi, who was the Minister of Finance in 1998 under President Chiluba, whose cabinet decided to privatize most of the Zambian companies. Zam Economics is discouraged to point out that Nawakwi studied economics as well. How much effort we the economists are putting in to revamp Zambia's collapsed economy. And in the midst of all these efforts, then she comes out to distract and divert our efforts and our attention to personal grudges against a successful economist who has sacrificed himself to rebuild Zambia's collapsed economy. The problem of this government, of which Nawakwi has decided to connive with, is that they want to kill the snake by hitting it on its tail, instead of hitting the snake on the head. Since the PF came into office, it's been poor economic policy and priorities. They got too excited that now that was their chance to become billionaires. So the only way to be rich was to introduce mega billion projects in construction and roads. This brought loopholes of corruption. Now they have borrowed billions of dollars and have plunged Zambia into a debt trap with embarrassing the country as one of the most corrupt countries in the corruption index. Getting out of the debt trap hole seems impossible, hence they resort to things like no, it's global crisis, no, it's global warming, no, it's drought, no, it's the armyworms, and now it's the COVID-19, as if it's only Zambia that has been experiencing these global trends. The funny thing is that those in leadership positions cheating people with such lame excuses are getting fatter and building mansions. Now they want to eliminate a person who in history has been giving perfect advice to them on their careless borrowing and misuse of loans. The School of Economics has evolved. The economics of jealousy, bring him down, violence, witchcraft, impersonation, and corruption, it's old school. And if we continue on such trends, Zambia is going to be a primitive economy. However, it's important to remind the failed old school economists that as you point an accusation finger at a successful economist, 3 fingers are pointing right back at you. The reality of this life is on the choices on economic planning. What's coming out clearly is that government, of which Nawakwi was finance minister and many others in the reign of Chiluba, sold the Zambian companies, which was not really a bad thing in the economist's eye at that time. Many consultants were involved, including accountants, lawyers or solicitors, valuators, and these were compensated or paid for their services. Some used this money to party, buy luxurious cars and goods, drink, waste their payments away. But a young, brilliant man known as Hakainde Hichilema knew how to invest and later became a billionaire from clean, intelligent application of his economics. This has brought about jealousy and hatred from his colleagues who misapplied their economic planning into autonomous expenditure without saving and investment. Therefore, we in the new school of economics have great lessons to learn from this very successful economist Hakainde Hichilema, and have no time for bad economists as examples in this critical time to rescue Zambia from intensive care units suffering from economic depression. In this critical time, we want economists who speak economics from their heads like HH, who understands economics and rightly applies its theory in productive practical applications. The whole world has seen his success from his hard work and intelligence. Another one who is going the wrong direction is Sean Tembo, a leader of one of the very minority opposition parties. He has shockingly joined the bandwagon of irrelevance of diverting our attention to fighting HH on the same privatization issue of 20 years ago. He has also a similar reason. He failed to work with the opposition in an alliance recently and decided to leave the alliance with the UPND. These small opposition parties have lost direction. In fact, we should stop calling them opposition because they're not really opposing anything. Instead, they are allies of the ruling party. There are no checks and balances from these. These are a waste of our time. There's a very strong wind blowing and speculating that people are dissatisfied with the failed economy, and the majority have noticed that these have failed them. Hence the plot to accuse HH, arrest him on trumped-up charges like they did before when he was accused for treason, which he never committed. But this time around, they want to eliminate him once he's arrested. But the masses are saying that this time around, they will not allow their leader to be arrested before the elections, as they have seen their evil plot to kill him once he's arrested. The question is, surely, this huge economic plunder and problem Zambia is going through, which the PF is failing to resolve because of simply not being serious, going to end when we arrest and kill HH? Privatization is the purchase of the shares of a publicly traded company by private investors, or it can be in the form of a sale of a state-owned company. There are 2 main methods we can privatize, either by selling the shares or just by selling the company and its assets on a cash basis. Now, to do this, you have to incur certain costs. This is where brokers, accountants, lawyers or solicitors, advisory and valuation service providers receive huge commissions or payments for their services. Take note that to carry out valuation is a big responsibility by highly qualified professionals. There are a number of different ways of putting a value on a business. I'll just highlight a few important methods here, but in this presentation, I'll exclude the mathematical calculations. Number 1. The asset-based valuation method. In the net assets method of share valuation, tangible assets are divided by a number of shares. Therefore, the summary statement of financial position is given to the valuator by the company management. The second one is the income-based valuation method. This is a common method of evaluating a controlling interest in a company, where the owner, in this case the government under the MMD, can decide on the dividend and retentions policy. The price-earnings ratio relates earnings per share to the share's value. Since the price-earnings ratio is equals to market value divided by earnings per share, then mathematically, market value per share will be equals to earnings per share multiplied by the price-earnings ratio. Another income-based valuation model is the earnings yield method. Earnings yield is equals to earnings per share divided by market price per share multiplied by 100%. The third and the last method I'll highlight to you is the use of cash flow-based valuation models. The first under the cash-based valuation model is the much-loved dividend valuation model. It is based on the theory that an equilibrium price for any share on a stock market is the future expected stream of income from the security and discounted at a suitable cost of capital. It's here where we use the dividend growth model formula. And finally, we will also have one the accountants love so much, the discounted cash flow basis of valuation. This method is appropriate when one company intends to buy the assets of another company and make future investments in order to improve cash flows in the future. After these valuations were done, these were handed over to the government, where the entire team of the professionals had to go through at the Ministry of Finance in collaboration with the ZPA, Zambia Privatization Agency, then make their decisions on either to continue the sale of the Zambian-owned companies. So, this misleading of people that a single person who was just part of the team of professional valuators sold the mines is very senseless and dangerous to be given to people with little or no idea on the role of valuators. These valuators don't make decisions to sell. They just calculate the firm's value, just like the lawyers who received also huge sums of money for their legal services. Therefore, moving forward, we need to concentrate on workable formulas to create employment for all Zambians. We need to emulate Donald Trump, who has broken the record and brought unemployment rate to a record low of 3% in the USA. We are really behind, and our leaders should not confuse us with rhetoric policies on non-issues. When the MMD-led government decided to sell or privatize Zambian-owned companies, it was their job to look into the livelihoods of the Zambian workers in the affected companies. So like I said before, when pointing an accusation finger, we forget that 3 fingers are gonna point right back at you. The valuator had no role to look into the future of those workers. That was not his role. You won't find it in any of the valuation models, but it was the government's role with its cabinet and the Minister of Finance and National Planning, who never planned well for those people who lost their jobs in the mines. And all the former workers who have been neglected from the sale of the companies can clearly blame it on the seller and not the valuator. And in this case, the MMD government was responsible. This is similar to what the current PF government has done by hiring and giving a contract to a French company on financial consultancy to Zambia's debt crisis. 20 years in the future, no one who has normal functioning brain cells will come and blame and arrest Lazard Ferres for the hardships Zambians will be going through at that time in 20 years' time in the future. It just doesn't add up. It's a joke. So let's not take pride in pronouncements that we are now setting up a commission of inquiries to find fault in one single man to eliminate him. Come on, people. We are sick of this nonsense. Our friends are now in the 4th industrial revolution, and we still act like we are undressed Shaka Zulus jumping like monkeys from one tree to another. Can we change and evolve as well? At the end of the day, we shouldn't forget that we have evolved and Zambians have advanced tech in tens. It's very difficult to blindfold Zambian citizens. Instead, we need to work together for the betterment of the poor Zambians feeling the pinch of our collapsed economy.